welcome everyone. We're delighted you're here. A couple of quick bits of business, and then we'll talk about how the hour is going to go, and it will end on time as we do these things. This is our fifth one of these. So all the mistakes we made in the earlier ones have been learned, and we will make new mistakes, as Esther is fond of saying on this call. The purpose of today is not to answer questions, but instead to ask them. And most importantly, for all of us to come out of this understanding we're not alone. And maybe just a bit of history. When I started talking to friends of mine over the last now 3.5 months about the thing they were most worried about, they all had a version of income inequality, the Supreme Court, MAGA, what was going on in Ukraine, global, climate change. They all had a thing they were worried about. And they all thought individually, these are people who, all of us have done extraordinary things in our career and have done good work and are doing good work now. And all of them said to me kind of privately, we think it may be unsolvable. And that scared me a little bit, because these were people that were used to taking on big things and thinking of them as solvable. But as we met for the first time back in June, the thing that was clear was that the thing that was amplifying the problems collectively was media. And we're going to talk a little bit on this call about what that word even means in the current world. And so what I ended up saying, and those of you who know me know that I am an unfailing optimist. What I ended up saying was, it didn't used to be this way. I mean, when I was young, when I was 15, 16 years old, the media that I watched that was the most damaging was Batman. And it was guilty of selling sugared cereal. That was the crime that Batman and Gilligan's Island committed on teenagers. And the reason I say that is, if you look at the last 20 years, the thing we're going to talk about today is a relatively new occurrence. And while it's complicated and it doesn't have a single solution, I think that collectively, the group of people that you're going to meet, and some of whom you're going to become part of, we hope, collectively have the knowledge and wisdom to solve pieces of it. So just when I say you're not alone, what I mean by that is, we are, as of today, 75 people. And each of them is extraordinary in their own right. And some of them and some of them you'll get to meet. And some of them you have a feud with from years ago and you can settle it. But here's the agenda of the hour we're going to spend together. We're going to start with an introduction from Baratunde Thurston, our friend and an advisory board member. And then we're going to have two conversations, each about 5 minutes long, one with Esther Dyson, the other with Danny Rogers. Very different perspectives on this space that we're in. And then I'll do a brief introduction of the media space and what we think we've found as a solvable collective set of problems. But very quickly, we're going to get into part two, certainly before the half-hour mark, maybe as soon as 20, 22 minutes, which is a conversation. And nobody's obliged to participate. We're not going to guilt anyone into saying anything or turning their camera on. You're welcome to sit and observe. But we hope that the conversation, someone's got noise in the background.
Yeah, the problem is they are participating right now.
Okay, yes. You're welcome to participate, ideally not with background noise. So the purpose of the conversation is to begin to see if we can tease out some ideas for places where there are interesting opportunities to experiment. And I will tell you a little bit about what this organization is doing. But to begin with, I thought the best thing to do was just to begin with this scene setter piece, which is, this is from our very first gathering. And with that, let me introduce 2 minutes with Baratunde Thurston.
Hey y'all, Baratunde here. I'll nominate a concern. There's, yes, media can make a difference. It can make the world better, it can make the world worse. It's how we understand the world. It's media, it's in between us and the world. So it's the story that we hear and tell. What has been frustrating me greatly, especially with the latest flare-ups in the country, is that we seem to just have a very lopsided storytelling environment. where the narrative of fear and loss and scapegoating targeted at white people is winning. And that's going to eat the whole damn world. It's going to kill everybody with guns. It's going to take women's agency. It's going to literally burn the planet down, because a lot of white people have been terrified, and there's profit in the terror. There's algorithmic profit from these networks that don't care about the content, just about the likes and the popularity. And the same kind of analog algorithm affects our campaign financing. So IRL is just chasing digital in terms of hyping up these edge cases. I would be interested in efforts that are proven to reach and connect with folks with a different narrative. I'd be interested in highlighting and celebrating effective storytelling that does the opposite of that discord acceleration. And then I am particularly interested in a different story we can tell white people so they don't burn the whole world down and take us all with them. That's what's happening. And it's just beyond infuriating. And we're monetizing hate. So I'm still angry about Buffalo. I'm still angry about Uvalde. I'm still angry about George Floyd. I'm still angry about fucking slavery. And it's a story challenge because people get paid to poke at the weakest emotion and exploit that and make money off of that and gain attention off of that. It is not the only way, but it is the winning way right now, because we've set the machines up this way, and then we set the rest of our society to follow those machines. If we can focus on some area of that, count me in to join another working group, to experiment myself. Thank you. That was an extended soliloquy.
So I love him. And what I love about him is that the message is so pointed and serious and angry and troubled, and it's delivered with such joy and optimism. And I think it captures what we're trying to do here. So with that, we're gonna start with two conversations, and I'll shut off the screen share so that Esther gets full screen. And with that, Esther, Dyson, take it away.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure what order would go in. Do you want to start with a question, or shall I start with an observation?
I'll start with a question. You know, your focus is on health and wellness, but your background is this extraordinary mix of digital and journalism and analysts, and you've been in the room or led the room when we built this thing that we're now all talking about. How does your wellness worldview fit into digital?
Okay, that's a good start. And one other thing you forgot was Russia. And
yes,
the world experts in obfuscation, in the use of the passive voice. You know, like somehow he fell out of the window. Happens, unfortunately, to doctors who discover inconvenient truths. Cynicism, you know, and it's like they don't care whether you believe, they just want you to be confused and skeptical. I don't think the Russians actually were trying to get Trump elected. I think they were simply trying to have a contested election. That was by far the most valuable result, which they achieved. So today I was reading an interesting article in the Information about misinformation and hate. And I totally agree with Bartunde. Hate sells. And there's a wonderful book by Mark Tybee about, it's called Hate Incorporated, how the news, it's not a new insight. People are covering politics as if it were a sport, and they're writing about, you know, like tactics rather than the policies that are ultimately the subject of what we're trying to achieve through our government, through our legislators. Anyway, they were talking about finding misinformation and hate and so forth and so on. And, you know, there's can't find it, and then what you do about it after you find it. And I think I think there's a much more interesting way to look at this. And how many of you know how a PET scan actually works? They put sugar that's slightly radioactive. That's why you have to drink something before the PET scan. And then the scanner picks up the movement of the sugar through your body, which is sort of a proxy for the flow of energy. And if something's growing like a cancer, it will basically suck up a lot of the sugar. And so you're looking not for the overall metabolism, but sort of like for metabolic hotspots. And, you know, whereas a liquid biopsy is kind of what they're trying to do. They're looking for basically little, malignant cells in the bloodstream. And so, oh my gosh, I found in the liquid biopsy, this person has cancer, but I have no idea where it is. I just see these little signs of it. And that's kind of how we're detecting this problem now. And so you take out the cells. It's like straining the blood. You take out the bad cells, but you don't really find the source, and you don't know the hotspots or where it's coming from. And so what we really should be doing is be looking for these hotspots of metabolic activity, because whether you're trying to sow hate through a political or cultural agenda of some kind, or often, I mean, a lot of these hate sites and a lot of the media, they're not really motivated by a political strategy. They're motivated by the tactic of making more money. It's really interesting if you interview a lot of these really crappy, I look at my spam because, for me, it's like a liquid biopsy of the world. They're trying to make money. And the way to make money is to scare people, to sell them stories, to foster hate. And it's like this guy I knew who grew up in Detroit. His mother sent scam real estate proposals to people, and he was an 8-year-old, and he licked the envelopes, and that was what he was going to do, because that was his family business, real estate scams. And then he got lucky, and some guy told him maybe not, and helped him get to college. But it's just another way to make money, and they don't think about the consequences of it. And I think we need, if we want to go after this stuff, the way to find it is sort of to go to the source. And you can do that by looking for metabolic patterns. Everything from the timing and cadence of the messaging. Is it in the wrong time zones? Are the words duplicative? What we might call plagiarism if the stuff was worth copying. But it's simply, too many people sending the same message, pretending to be different people. And of course, they're chatbots or some kind of spam farm or something, without regard to the content. And at the other end, you look at the flows of money. Where is the advertising going to? Where the content is unoriginal. And I mean, I get spam emails that I don't know how many of you get the Windows Defender. I mean, there are these things that they go for months. Florida man enters bar. Florida man wows crowd. I've never actually read the email, but some of these things have been crowding my inbox for months. And of course, then there's the stuff that's on the web that's not email that I don't bother to look at. But we need to get more intelligent about how we go after this stuff. And this is not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is education and a lot of other things. But I just read this piece in the Information today and thought they really need to look at it differently. When you're talking about somebody like a Facebook trying to clean up their site, the way to do it is not by looking for genetic markers, it's by looking for metabolic hotspots. And I'll leave it at that. We can have an interesting conversation. But
excellent.
I say something new.
All right, metabolism will be part of our conversation. Danny, you're up.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Esther. That was a really great kind of intro to the conversation. I don't know about you all, but I for one get chills when I watch and rewatch Baratunde's 2-minute clip, because I don't think I can't really think of anyone who articulates the problem better than him. So all I can hope to do is sort of add a little bit of context to what he said, because I think the only thing I'll note about Baratunde's articulation of the problem is that it's U.S. focused, and I think the U.S. is sort of the center of the issue, because so Esther, you pointed out the Russians, right? The Russians are some of the best at this, and I'll get to that, but the U.S. is both the prime target of anyone seeking to influence a population, right? If you want the world to go a certain way, you point America that certain way, and the world will go along.
That's sort of a US centric point of view, actually. But
I completely understand, and I don't mean that I mean that in a way of like, I think the US is one of the biggest cultural exporters in the world. And so,
but still, if you fix the US, you're not going to fix Hungary.
Oh, no, not at all.
Quiet now, sorry.
Well, I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean. I mean, what I was going to say about Baratunde's articulation of the problem is that how he described it applies in analogy to all the other places on Earth, right? Hungary, what we just saw happen in Sweden, a lot of what's happening in South America or Asia, wherever you look, the world's political discourse is polarizing, and the hateful extremes of that discourse is threatening to win out, and in some places achieving victory, like we saw in Sweden this past week.
Danny, before you go further, explain in 30 seconds what the Global Disinformation Index is, because that's your.
Well, my nonprofit that I co-founded 4 or 5 years ago now, we track open web disinformation around the internet and around the world. So in dozens of languages, we have 40 people around the world tracking these things for governments and ad tech companies and NGOs and things like that, and platforms as well. So we catalog what we see. We provide intelligence to various platforms and governments and things like that. So we're kind of neck deep in this around the world, which is kind of why I'm saying, I think Baratunde articulated the problem really well, and that same articulation applies in whatever form. Look at India, for example, right, and the rise of Hindu nationalism. It's the same effect, the same cause. Substitute out the players, so to speak. And Esther, to your point, I think the reason it's sort of America's at the center of the problem is because these are fundamentally American companies driving this problem. So the thing I kind of wanted to say was, all of these scammers, all of these kind of hate peddlers, they've actually been around for a long time, right? Disinformation is not a new problem. As I teach in my class at NYU, the story of Antony and Cleopatra, as retold by Shakespeare and acted out by Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, is all a disinformation campaign started by, well, I'll get to TikTok momentarily, but started by by a political rival in ancient Rome, right? And that disinformation campaign is still being reiterated today. The question is, why are we talking about this now? Why weren't we talking about this 2 decades ago when it's been around that long? And to me, the answer is, I put this sort of milepost in history at around 2012, because a few things happened kind of leading up to 2012, things like the Arab Spring, where we also have this optimistic view of what people would call in connection technology, the internet connectivity, giving voice to the unvoiced. And I still think there's a very valid role that technology has played, a very valid change, right? But what that started to do was threaten existing power structures. And in 2012, in fact, in May of 2012, a few things happened. Facebook went public. And a lot of folks, if you remember, were skeptical that Facebook could succeed as a public entity, and thus sort of had their work cut out for them. And the Bolotnaya Square protests after Putin's sort of sham re-election campaign, right, was some of the first protests that really put the fear of the population in Putin, and convinced him at the time that Facebook, where these protests were being organically organized, was the work of the CIA to try to overthrow him. And so, as just an example of existing power structures being threatened by this new connection technology, I think those existing power structures got really smart about it really quick and started working deliberately to do everything they could to disarm it, right? Facebook as this sort of, community grassroots sort of organizing platform, suddenly became this battleground that, well, I can't turn it off, so let me start, that was when Putin started onshoring a lot of things and requiring that tech companies have Russian presences. That's when Prigozhin started efforts to fill Facebook with garbage, right? If you can't beat it, at least neutralize it by filling it with trash, right? So and that was replicated around the world, and everybody for whom this was threatening suddenly started fighting back. And so at the same time, Facebook had to show their X% growth every quarter, and were doing anything and everything they could. And that's when, if you remember the news about Facebook's social contagion experiment that they ran, it broke in 2012, and that really kind of established, for those of us watching really closely, that this company had no ethical compass, right? Here they were manipulating emotions of their users deliberately, doing experiments on them with absolutely no institutional review board oversight, no thought given to the negative consequences on the human subjects on whom they were experimenting, and kind of thumbing their nose in the face of the psychological research community as they were doing this.
So let's make sure we keep going, because I want to get to the open conversation where I know people are going to have questions for you.
Sure. So to wrap up, or I was just going to say that we're in an era now where these companies, mostly American, right now TikTok is kind of taking over the mantle, but all of these companies they now shape the worldview of well over half the world's population, probably more like 3/4 at this point, and all of it's driven by algorithmic amplification that can pull from this infinite sea of content, craft a story, and that story is designed entirely to create the most personally engaging view of reality for every individual on Earth. And when you have that environment, it's no wonder that none of us can agree on basic facts like the Earth is round. And so we're in this era, and on the one hand, we're seeing the sort of forces of progress fight back. But on the other hand, you look at something like TikTok, which has the eyeballs of most of the world's youth now. And even if we did pass all this tech regulatory reform in the US, wouldn't affect TikTok as a Chinese company, far more levers and far scarier. And so that's my take on the problem.
Thank you. So I want to kind of set the stage, and then we're going to open the conversation up. So the first question is, this word media is part of the problem, because it gets used interchangeably. News media is one thing, mass media is another, social media is another, and they often get used as if everyone knows which media you're talking about. So one of our members, who many of you know, is Evan Shapiro, and he puts together this fabulous map. This is 2 months old, but it's still entirely relevant for this conversation. And the point that he makes is that when we think, as those of us who are not in our 20s, think about media, we tend to think, oh, well, media is the New York Times, or media is, whatever. And his point, and the map is kind of disturbing in its obviousness, is no, media is Amazon, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, which I don't even exactly know, Meta, Tencent, and then I did this a couple of calls ago, and it made people mad at me, which made me want to do it again. Someone asked me to show where the New York Times was on this map. And so the answer is, it's there. It's that pinprick just above Apple. And the argument, of course, is, well, but it's not about dollars, it has more impact, whatever. But the point is that this is the world we live in. In terms of media, this is the world we live in. And as another way to look at the definition of media, there's kind of an objective way to look at it, which is dollars. And so this is the media pie. This was research that was done by one of our interns over the summer. This is the media pie in 2021. And each one of these slivers are the dollars that go to these categories of media. And the reason why this is relevant is, so here's social media over here at 16%. Here's streaming at 15%, entertainment, which is a big category, at 28%, cable TV, gaming, which we don't generally think of, but we should. And news ends up being right over here, this kind of tan color off on the top right. When you talk to young people, and the definition of young, 17 to mid 20s, and you ask them where they get their news, there's a recent Reuters report out, which I can share if you haven't seen it, and the fastest growing source of news for young people around the world is TikTok. And I don't think of TikTok as a news source, but lots of people do. So this organization was crafted in a series of meetings over the last, we're 90 days old. We're less than 3 months old. And in that 3 months, we've gone from 0 members to 75 advisors, extraordinary group of people. I don't think we're anywhere, there's no slowing down of the growth of this organization. And the reason is because we think this problem of how we embrace and bring media back into alignment with sustainable goals, so it's not destroying the planet, to use Bartunde's phrase, it is a solvable but complicated problem. And we did an interview, had a conversation with 8 or 9 teenagers around a table. There was no adult in the room. It was all of them talking amongst themselves. And I'll share it with anyone from this call that would like to see the hour. They were so sophisticated in their understanding of the media world that they live in, the media sea that they swim in. They love it. They have no plans to reduce their involvement in it, which I think makes sense. They also are fearful of it and know that it's hurting them. And whatever your relationship to the world is, whether you have children or grandchildren or no children, the future is going to be impacted by how this media space allows these people to grow up. And so with that, I'd like to kind of open it to conversation. I'll only ask a couple of little favors. No speeches. Please feel free to share your opinion, your perspective, ask questions, but keep it to 30 seconds or a minute, not 5, because I want everyone to get a chance to talk. We'd love to hear your name and 1 sentence of what you work on, but we don't need a biography. We all have LinkedIn. So with that, question number 1, how do you think today's media is impacting a young generation of consumers and creators?
Steve, I'll volunteer to go first. My name's Julie Scelfo. I'm a longtime journalist. I'm a media ecologist, and I'm a parent of 3 kids. And I've been thinking about this question very intensely for some time. And I've been working with Heidi Boisvert, who we both know from TED, who is a scientist who studies the neurobiological effects of media. Esther surely won't remember me, but a million years ago, I worked at Brill's Content when Steve turned to her for help answering these questions when the internet was first born. I think what you're doing is so important. I think the goals that you have set out are amazing. Respectfully, I think we might be asking the wrong questions. I think that the question we need to ask, and this conclusion is the same thing that Yasmin Green, the head of Jigsaw, said on the stage at Unfinished last year, that there really is no choice now except to have some kind of culture shift where everyone is savvy about the importance of media in their lives and has more tools to make decisions about how much media to expose themselves to, what kind of content to consume, and where to limit media. The way culture works, it's not that these media are now single-handedly responsible for everything society thinks, but they play a huge role, mitigated against the other things that shape society: families, culture, community. So I just think we can't look at fixing the media like that's going to solve everything. We have to look at it holistically.
So a couple of things just to set the stage clearly. When I say there are no right answers here, we are collectively feeling around in the dark, trying to see what things we can collectively work on. We're not looking for a problem that has a solution. And so you're exactly right to say, add more questions to the list, we'll knock some off. The word sustainable grew out of a series of conversations. I'm curious, how old are your kids?
I have 3 boys. They are 12, 14, and 15. Or to put it differently, when my 15-year-old, this is how, raising 3 kids, 12, 14, and 17. When my 17-year-old was born, there were no iPhones, and it was still the Facebook. He saw no television for the first 2 years of his life, very minimal television, didn't get a phone until he was an adolescent. My 14-year-old was born into a world where Facebook was popular and parents began photographing their children. And my 12-year-old lives in the world of TikTok. So, they have a parent who is a little more informed than most about the central role of media in their lives. But the difference, even in just the 5 years that they were born, is profound in terms of how they're being shaped in the world they live in. So that's, by the way, you're a perfect test case for this entire conversation. Thank you for sharing that. And part of what I love about that story is it is a reminder that this is a new thing. This phenomenon. It's not new, Steve. I totally disagree. I think as long
17 years old.
Pardon?
I'm just saying it's changed for each of your children is my point.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true. But as long as human beings have lived from the time we lived in caves, every time there was a new technology, it completely shifted our values as a culture, the way we communicated and the way we think. That was Neil Postman's idea behind media ecology. So there's tons of existing research about the way in which humans shape their beliefs, the way we're influenced. And, I just think we need to think differently about how we talk about it and how we work on it. I share your frustration, and I too love the way Baratunde framed it, but I think there just needs to be more of a collective response. So I'm glad you're convening that.
Yeah. Kevin, say that thing you put in the chat out loud, because that's exactly where we need to go.
Thanks, Steve. My name is Kevin Walson. I run a company called Intake Advisors, and I've been in digital for way too long, since the mid-90s. But I think when you look at things today, is that the social networks have really become amplifiers of false content, and I think that that's the biggest problem. There's no filter whatsoever, and I do think it's akin to shouting fire in a crowded movie theater, but essentially having the opportunity to shout fire in every crowded movie theater at the exact same time, which I think is what we're seeing today. But the reality is, and I have a lot of conversations with people about media, is that the social networks and media are not the same. And I think that that's, as a matter of fact, when you put that chart up before, it even emphasizes that point even more, because the New York Times is media. And I've worked for Nexstar, Media General, Lynn Broadcasting, J. Walter Thompson, WPP. These are companies that have dealt with media since the advent of time. To me, fundamentally, the biggest challenge that we have is that it all comes down to the stock price and the revenue that's generated by these companies, and how they generate that revenue. And when you look back to my time when I first came into the advertising and marketing space, you had regulation of media, you had oversight of media. You don't have that anymore. It is an absolute free-for-all. And it's that is the fundamental problem. But the bigger problem is, Pandora's out of the box. So the reality is it even feasible to have a discussion about putting Pandora back into the box? Because that's what we're asking. And I just don't know how feasible that is. I do think that the end result is regulation. Regulation is the only way to solve this problem. And not many people will go for it, primarily because Google, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, they're the amount of dollars that they spend on lobbying is just not going to make it a reality. But the reality is it needs to be regulated. It's as simple as that. These, if you want to call it media, if Facebook wants to call themselves media, I don't know if anybody on this watched Mark Zuckerberg's Joe Rogan podcast or listened to it. It's pretty incredible, because I think Mark Zuckerberg really opened up Facebook to a lot of liability, because he talked about the fact that the algorithms are all based on human decisions. And, where people kind of blame it on the algorithm, blame it on the technology, that's why these certain things happen. In the end, it's human decisions that have made Facebook what it is today. And it needs to be filtered. It needs some guardrails, and it doesn't have it.
So,
All right. So, yeah, go ahead.
So my name is Mark Walsh, and I know many on this Zoom, but in 1977, I was a TV anchorman and news director for a CBS television affiliate in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Yes, Clarksburg, West Virginia. But the interesting thing is that to the point, the FCC existed then. And I had to file our nightly newscast. We had no teleprompter. Had to file what percentage of our on-air time was dedicated to political issues and stuff like that. And that's because we were a representative of a moderated and regulated environment called Federal Communications Purview. And I just think of, I think of Bitcoin as a stateless currency. I think of Facebook, they're stateless entities. They have no state that could possibly oversee them. So although I agree with Kevin's point, I don't think there's going to be any possible way to put the genie back in the bottle of regulation. What I'm most concerned about is with stateless media, is that we have young people that don't identify with the state. I'm spending a lot of time in civics and citizenry, and it just is remarkable to me that if they think TikTok is news, they have no concept of what it means to be a citizen of the nation they're in, no matter where they're watching TikTok. But FCC control over my career in 1977 and 78 was quite dramatic, and today there is zero element of that in any of the social media.
So let me throw a little gasoline on the fire, because I know people on this call feel very strongly and differently about this. Maybe the only thing that the Democrats and the Republicans agree on at this moment in time is the either removal or rewriting of Section 230. And while I think they agree for entirely different political reasons, does anyone want to dive into whether or not that's I think to some extent it depends on what happens at the midterms, but where is Section 230, and is anybody holding up a hope that that's going to dial back the noise?
Steve, hi everybody. I'm Brad Behrens. I'm formerly the editor-in-chief at the Interactive Advertising Bureau. I'm a senior research fellow and strategic advisor at the Center for the Digital Future at USC Annenberg. Been around the business for a long time. Section 230 is the only thing upon which Donald Trump and I have ever agreed, although only partially. I would love to think that something could be done about 230, but I just don't think that that's at all likely, even if even if one party were to sweep, the legislature in the midterms, and we were not to be in this kind of, cholesterol logjam, sclerotic inactivity in Congress. We still have more lobbyists from the tech platforms wandering around DC than there are legislators. And it's really going to be a rough time to get any kind of will to change that. So I'm skeptical about the possibility of that.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree about the skepticism. I think there's two pieces there, right? There's the should and there's the can. And I certainly agree, like the can is definitely a big open question. And Steve, to your point earlier, like there's agreement that something should be done. And I think you've definitely kind of honed in on the core of the problem, right? Like part of the reason these companies are so enormous is because they have had to face zero liability for those choices. Like Zuckerberg can go on Joe Rogan and say whatever he wants, and he knows that under the current, under the current regulatory regime, he has no liability for it, period. And that's been established over and over again, and very likely will be reestablished with this Myanmar lawsuit, right? But I think we can also probably agree that's where it should happen, right? The real challenge comes with the what do you replace it with, right? And what exactly do you do? And that's where especially the two parties diverge, right? They all agree something should be done, but they have opposing views of what exactly should be done and what these companies should be held liable for. So I completely agree the should, and I even know of a number of very reasonable proposals, focusing on user harm or individual harm from these platforms. I think you're right that there's a lot to be skeptical about of whether it can be achieved in any short amount of time.
I was on a call this morning with a father whose stepson took his own life, and believes it was because of what he was exposed to on the internet. And I said to him, not knowing the answer, trying to be sensitive, I said, how many parents do you know that are in the same situation? And I said, more than 10. And he said, oh, many more than that. And, I don't think there's any parent that has children from the age of 7 through whatever that aren't fearful of what could happen to their children and what they're exposed to. And he came away because he's asking us as an organization if we'd like to facilitate a support group for parents. And I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I think we could find someone and be part of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to volunteer. I don't think you even need to take that on because it's already happened. The Boston Children's Hospital has established the first digital wellness clinic in the country, I believe, because, like one of the number one prescriptions that psychologists are writing right now is to tell parents to unplug because so many kids are having such addiction issues, such depression, all that kind of thing. So I definitely think you're right. It's like majorly connected.
So the same father, we talked about unplugging, and his answer was, it's like saying to a fish, hey, listen, you should take some time out of the water. Which struck me as, he's like, that's how unreasonable that answer. I want to go back to 230 for a second though, because Esther, I expected you to have strong feelings about this. Do you not wish to share them?
I just think, the problem is it's kind of the same. The people who want it changed want the same change, but they want their side to be in charge, is probably the way to say it. And so, I'm not sure it's going to solve the problem until the problem of who's in charge and, kind of overall transparency and stuff like that is resolved. It just sort of, it moves the battlefield around, but it doesn't change the armies.
So one of the things that this organization is not doing, at least for the time being, so we're a 501c3, and so we're specifically not raising money to do political lobbying or legislative work, partly because we think there's a lot of people doing that already and it's not our expertise as a group. But secondly, because I guess I worry, while I understand the instinct to legislate, I think, Mark's point is an important one, which is, what in what country, how do you legislate the problem? So here is another example. Does anyone have feelings about the legislation that was just passed in California that Gavin Newsom just signed? I think that was yesterday. Child protection, something. I don't understand it yet. So
overall, I think it's a great step, but it's still just a step, and it doesn't address some of the basic things we've been talking about. I mean, I would push back on the these companies are stateless. I think these companies are. I think these companies act like they're stateless. They act more powerful than states. But the U.S. government does have the power to regulate them if it chose to exercise it.
Right, but the challenge is the execution of that authority is going to be done by specific people, groups, cultures. And so, yes, the US has the power to put us in jail, and Facebook does not.
Right. Well, and I mean, some like Roger McNamee would say, like, the US has the power to put Mark Zuckerberg in jail.
Yes.
I mean, I mean, I don't know that I'm quite at Roger's plane of existence, but
it has the power to put Trump in jail.
Right. Well, I guess that's sort of the point, is that they act stateless, but they aren't, right? And I mean, I remember I was living in Long Island City when the Amazon HQ2 thing debate was happening, and I remember State Senator Mike Gianaris, after he basically killed the $3 billion Amazon tax break, he said this is an issue of government sovereignty. That Amazon can roll in, and I mean, because I'm also native to the DC area, and that same weekend in DC, they decided to rename Crystal City Potomac Landing because Jeff Bezos decided he liked the sound of it better. And in Queens, Mike Gianaris said to pound sand. And you just saw the difference in one government exerting sovereignty and another government rolling over. So I think government sovereignty can exist. I mean, look, Amazon still hired 15,000 people in New York not long after that, right? But government sovereignty can exist when it's not captured by special interests, and if it chose to act. I think that's the dilemma that we're facing.
So the conversation that's kicking around in all of the halls that I operate in is whether or not TikTok should be, the subject of a federal ban. Anyone want to jump in and defend, or I think Scott Galloway said it should be shut down immediately, was his comment the other day.
Meh. I mean,
Nah.
yeah, absolutely. It's a compelling question, but there's so many different media sources. There's with no regulation whatsoever. I just think I think that I feel lobbyists' fingers on that one. It's a way of changing the conversation away from YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, pointing the finger at the devil coming from China and saying, better us than them, which I'm very skeptical. The issue, I mean, the thing that I put into the chat that I just want to say out loud before we all depart is until we make it possible for brand marketers and media agencies to stop hiding behind each other, until we do something about constricting the monetization of media and holding people responsible for the information that they support with their dollars. And by people, I mean Procter and Gamble, Capital One, Verizon. You look at the ANA's list of the top 100 national advertisers, not to mention all of the other thousands of advertisers. Until people bear some responsibility for where they advertise, then we're not going to make any progress. And so that's the other critical thing, because right now, brands say, oh, the agencies do that. And agencies say, we just do what the brands tell us to do, and nobody ever holds them to account. So
Rashad Tabakawala was on a call three weeks ago and said essentially a version of what you just said. And he said, and the phrase that's come up in a couple of different conversations has been misaligned incentives. And I had a call a week and a half ago with one of the two founders of Sleeping Giants about
which one?
About what it doesn't. I mean, but about whether or not shame was a useful, tool to your. I mean, you just said a version of their thesis, but it was also two people in a cardboard box, and they got tired and scared.
I know some of those folks, and there's a ready, fire, aim quality to how they do what they're doing, but what they're doing, I think, is important. Shame is moderately effective. Liability is the thing that I think is more effective. So getting it back to your question about 230, that, you know, if the ability for people to say, no, this has caused me harm, you know, that would be, you know, there are ways of increasing pressure, both by decreasing monetization or by increasing consequence. But right now, all of the people who are funneling billions of dollars into these businesses are not ever part of the conversation.
No.
So let me end with a final question. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot in the last 2 weeks is about coming out of the conversation we had with young people, was about the fact that could we not experiment with giving them tools so that they could be more responsible for their media consumption. And one of the young women on the call said, we want to be media activists, which is a phrase that has now echoed around in my head with some excitement. If there were apps that said, here are brands that I don't think are behaving properly, I like to have them not be allowed into my stream. That seems to be a technical feasibility. Maybe as opposed to trying to pressure either the platforms or the agencies for whom, you know, I mean, Facebook's largest shareholder is Fidelity, right? I mean, or TD Ameritrade, one of the big, you know, does anybody think the idea of giving, you know, thoughtful teenagers tools to be more activists in media is an interesting idea?
So Steve, can I just jump in, just because I will confess, and this is not like, well, I'll just say, like, when built, and that's what our nonprofit does. We built those tools. We've been pushing them out to ad tech for 5 years, relatively quietly, and we know very well, you know, Matt and Nandini and Claire Atkin and everyone involved in that kind of public shaming effort. We tend to live one layer behind the scenes and provide the data to enable exactly what you've said. And when we first tackled this problem, we released a study in 2019 that kind of tried to put a dollar amount on that exact kind of effect, Brad, that you're talking about, and it was about $235 million was our estimate, and that $235 million was going to about 2,000 websites. Now, out of the 2 million websites in Google's display network, it's a tiny number of sites, but these sites are the ones that drive the conversations. They drive it in all platforms. They drive ultimately the entire political conversation, both online and off, for example, on Fox News, to the extremes. And so what we've pushed those tools out. We've deployed our data in a bunch of choke points through the ad tech ecosystem, and we've actually, by our estimates now, derailed about $120 to $130 million a year of that 235. The problem is the other 50% of that is one company. It's Google, at least when you talk about open web display ads. And so it's that power concentration, right? These brands that they want, if we gave, like, Procter & Gamble would, if given a choice, elect not to do this, but they have no power when it comes up against the size of Google and Meta. I mean, that was the sort of the point of the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, was, you know, 100, 200 of the world's largest advertisers boycotted Facebook, and we can debate about the mechanics of that. Did they really give anything up? But Zuckerberg was explicitly, and this is a direct quote from him, defiant in the face of the revolt, because there's nowhere else to go. Like, ultimately, these companies have to advertise, they have to do their job, and when you have a company that can ignore 200 of its biggest customers, you have a company that is a monopoly, that is too large.
I'll flag this because when I was trying to get Rashad to teach us what the roadmap was, he said, look, just be aware, the biggest ad network on the planet and the one that's the fastest growing isn't any of the ones you named. And I said, all right, we'll take the bait. Which one isn't? And he said, all the data says that all the growth is happening at Amazon.
Yeah, well, that's now at the last year or two, right? But
yeah,
and so that's the one we're saying, you know, you want to see, you think Google is depraved, at least they pretend to care. Amazon doesn't even answer the phone.
All right, so let's do this. Just kind of because we're going to run out of time. Here's what I hope you all got out of this. The DNA in this organization is about positive, action-oriented experimentation and investigation. We're not looking for a solution or a button to push or a company to sue, or we think that there's an opportunity to explore 10 or 12 or 15 ideas, kind of a portfolio strategy. And then, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading about cigarette smoking and about how cigarette smoking, how the tobacco industry behaved, which is chilling and horrible in ways I didn't even know. And then how slowly there were chips away at that industry, not around the world. Certainly there's cigarette smoking and it's being promoted, you know, particularly to young people, but there was a change that was more incremental than it was magical. And I think that that's part of what we hope to do here. Here's what we're going to do next, because we are out of time. First of all, thank you all for coming and staying. Thank you all for participating. Please feel free to email info@SustainableMedia.Center if you have thoughts that you didn't want to share publicly, but as you think about this, hey, there's someone I know, and some of the chat has a whole bunch of different kind of parallel conversations that I'll harvest. Here's what we'll do with this video. We will share this video with the members of the organization. We won't share anything you said publicly without your permission. We may take some selects out of these conversations, and I may reach out to you and say, hey, we think you said something really interesting. We'd like to share it publicly, and you're welcome to say no. We want people to feel safe in these conversations, and we want you to return. You're going to get an email from us probably early Monday morning, mid-morning Monday, thanking you for coming and then asking you 3 questions. We'd like some feedback. We think we're making some mistakes and we'd like some guidance from all of you. That's why you're here. That's why you were invited. And with that, I want to thank everybody. It's 5 o'clock. I love ending on time. It's 5 o'clock in New York. Appreciate seeing you all and see you soon.
Thanks, Steve. This was great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Really fun. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
And good to see a bunch of people. Take care. Thanks.